Hey, hi, hello, my friends. It's Christy with 4am Junk Journals, and it is Wednesday, and we are on the case. All right, well, today is Wednesday, and as you guys know, every Wednesday we have a video giving more information on the case of who killed Mrs. Worthington. Today is the beginning of week 8. DNA doesn't lie. Okay, first of all, I do have more of the index cards. I can't find them at the moment, so I have to switch gears. These are a little smaller, so, but hopefully you can see also my black marker ran out of ink. So hopefully we can see this. Yeah, I'll try and fix it before next week's video. So DNA doesn't lie. All right, so we do have the DNA test results back for several that we sent over. The first one, we tested the DNA of Philip, trying to determine paternity for Philip. That's Philip Worthington, Mrs. Worthington's oldest son, and he was tested against his assumed father, Sebastian Worthington, and both of Mrs. Worthington's lovers, which would be Paul Holmes and Charles Warner. And Philip Worthington is Charles Warner's son. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Not overly surprising, though, because Charles said that he and Mrs. Worthington had kind of been having an affair for like 40 years, right? So it's not overly surprising. No real big shocks there, especially since Sebastian Worthington says he can't have children. All right, so then we tested Albert Worthington's DNA against all 3 possible fathers, and Albert Worthington, Mrs. Worthington's younger son, is Paul Holmes's son. This is a little more surprising since the relationship between Paul and Mrs. Worthington was assumed to have been more recent than that. I think Albert is supposed to be like 27 years old, 26, 27. And they were, I mean, that would have been like a 1 or 2 year difference in what we expected their relationship based on her um, diary entries. So that's something that we might look into because in her diary entries, she indicated a different date, a later date that she and Paul became involved. But Albert is supposed to be a little older than that, but he is conclusively Paul's son. Then we tested Nash Holmes to find out if Nash was related to Mrs. Worthington and to see who his father is. Now, Nash is supposed to be the adopted son of Paul and Ann Holmes, which brings us to another interesting point I'll get to in a minute. But he is supposed to be the adopted son of Paul and Ann. But the truth of the matter is, Nash is the son of Charles and Mrs. Worthington. So it appears that Nash must be one of the twins, assuming that the twins are Charles's children and not Paul's. Now, if the twins are Paul's children, as Mrs. Worthington stated, then Nash would not be one of the twins. However, based on his birth date, he would almost have to be if he was Mrs. Worthington's son, which he obviously is. So we move forward with Nash is, in fact, the boy twin of the two. Because there's no way he couldn't be, right? Because his birth date was the day after, supposedly the day after the twins were born. So he can't be Mrs. Worthington's son and someone else be Mrs. Worthington's son at the same time, that if they were born at the same time. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm rambling now. So Nash is the son of Charles Warner and Mrs. Worthington. Now, this brings me to an interesting point I wanted to bring up. Um, Paul said that Anne, or that Mrs. Worthington said she was leaving money to Nash to make up for what they had done while Anne was pregnant. But then Anne stated that she couldn't get pregnant. She had had a hysterectomy. So that's when we found out Nash was adopted. So Paul has been lying this whole time. Now, obviously, we know that Nash is truly Mrs. Worthington's son at this point, so we know why she left him money. But it's important for us, I think, to note that Paul is a liar. So, yeah. All right. Then we tested the DNA of Greta Collier, to find out if she had a biological tie. We checked both her DNA against Nash's DNA to see if she is potentially the other twin. We also checked it against Mrs. Worthington to find out if she was Mrs. Worthington's daughter. And the results show Greta really is Mrs. Worthington's niece. So there is a biological tie there to both people, but it's a distant tie. So she would be Nash's cousin and Mrs. Worthington's niece. So she's clearly not the girl twin. Okay, so with all this in mind, the detectives also wanted to check out the safe deposit box that had been found at Mrs. Worthington's bank. And when they went and investigated, they found that the safe deposit box holds many secrets. Amongst these secrets were three large envelopes full of pictures of the twins. These envelopes were addressed from a private investigator, and they also contained a contract between the private investigator and Mrs. Worthington, in which she had hired him to locate and keep her informed about her twin children, Christopher and Layla Worthington. So now we know for a fact that Christopher and Layla's pictures, the ones found in the attic, were actually the twins. The detective is Jackson Shaw, private investigator, and we will likely be seeing more from him, I assume, at some point soon. So the investigators at this point, they went back and they spoke with Paul again, or they attempted to speak with Paul again. They tried to contact him. He refused to talk with them, told them to speak to his attorney. Now we know already, we know already that Paul had indicated as his alibi that he had been meeting with his attorney, whose name is Chase Handley, at the time of the murder. Now he's refusing to talk with the police or the law enforcement, and he tells them to speak with his attorney. So they contact Chase Handley, and Mr. Handley basically tells them that he has nothing to offer to them at this time other than confirming Paul's alibi. He says that yes, he was meeting with Paul at on the morning of the murder. He indicates that Paul had a disagreement with Mrs. Worthington at her estate, had come home and phoned him, and he had come right over, and they had spent 3 or 4 hours in conference. So Paul's alibi is, at least for the moment, supported by his attorney. Oh, so with all of that going on, and it's a lot, right? There is a phone call to law enforcement in which has kind of shaken up the household. This phone call comes from Pearl's doctor, Dr. Nicholas Hayes, at the hospital. Dr. Nicholas Hayes is a pediatrician. He specializes in emergency pediatric care, and he calls to tell the investigators that although Pearl has a existing heart condition that she has had since birth, that he and the other emergency personnel are suspicious, and they think that Pearl has been poisoned. Okay, guys, we're going to leave it there. So yeah, lots to think about this week, lots to think about. And we're going to have more stuff coming. I will be putting up the DNA test results, the DNA test reports, into the Facebook group. We're still waiting on a toxicology report for Mrs. Worthington. What else? I need to put up the diary entries. I told one of our detectives I would get those put up. I haven't done that yet. Yeah, keep dropping those questions. Let's get some conversation going. And I am planning another live for this weekend. We are going to try and do that Sunday at 6 o'clock again. All right, for right now, the detectives on the case are Briana Jenkins, Jennifer Rowe, Sharon Oja, Karyn Mill, Kim Riggs, Erica Meares, Brittany Linger, Honey Price, Kathy Orlando from Dreamcraft Journals, Kathi Sowerbrower, Melanie Tash, The Passionate Sticker Haul, and Sassy Turtle Plans. Okay, everyone, it's time to fill your casebook up. Fill your casebook, have some fun, make some art, and become the greatest junk journal detectives in the world. Have a great day. I'll talk with you soon. Bye.